you by Kate in Whitehouse. You were a very bad person, Kate in Whitehouse. You want to document kind of, you know, if it breathes, it's documented. So not a good idea. Anyway, I thought that was terrific. So I mean, Murray suggested that I make some comments after each song. I'm very happy to do so. I mean, what a remarkable hour and a half's work. And yesterday, I run a company with two colleagues called London Song Company. Some of you have been along to some of our events, in fact. You have. Anybody else? And yesterday we had the pleasure of having Boo Huberdine along with us. And I don't know if you know him, but he is a fantastic singer-songwriter. He used to be, he works a lot with Eddie Reader. He used to be in a band called The Bible. And he is a one-man enterprise. He gigs and he gigs and he gigs and he gigs. He just goes around the country gigging the whole time. It's phenomenal how much he packs in. He'll do anything from house parties to theatres, whatever. And he loves working with people with songwriting. And he was saying about in his view, the thing about writing in a short time has an enormous amount of commend it. And in fact, he set our students a task. Also had an hour and a half to do it, and they also came up with some extraordinary results in such a short time. I thought that was fantastic, and that it had such a clear, as far as I could tell, you could hear every single lyric. I wasn't tuning into every single lyric. I'm sure the lyrics were crystal clear, John. And of course, a very engaging melody, a very engaging congruence. That's my favourite word in songwriting, the congruent whole. And wonderful to have Jenny's flute and so beautifully played that little counter melody at the beginning there, which came back at the end. I thought it was a fantastic beginning. Vocal harmonies, everything. What more could you want? It was a winter song, delightful. So I've got nothing more to say right now.
Thank you.
Fantastic, yeah. Really incredible. Would be, yeah. Extraordinary experience. I was there as a day pupil from the age of 4 to the age of 18. My only educational experience that I know. And Kit came along in the sixth form, and she was, I mean, it was actually a very small school, really. I suppose at its biggest, or about 300, something like that in total. And it was a school where if you did have whatever your particular kind of leanings and enthusiasms were, you could spend quite a long time indulging those, which we did. And music, well, I grew up, I was very fortunate to grow up in a musical family of professional musicians, and how we came to Devon was, in fact, that my mother and father met at the Royal Academy of Music just over here, just before the war. They got married, and then my dad was a conductor, my mother a cellist. When the war came, everything stopped. My dad joined the BBC as a technician, which is another hat that he wore, and immediately got stationed down into Start Point, which is this tiny kind of brick building on the coast in Devon, miles from anywhere. And their immediate thought was, let's go home to London, please, you know, and even though it'd been bombed out. But they stayed, and they just fell in love with Devon, and they stayed there for the rest of their lives. And in fact, my dad then had an orchestra called the Western Philharmonic after the war, which is the kind of predecessor to the Bournemouth Orchestra. And my mother started crazy cello teaching on buses and trains, which she could drive all over the county. And so it became very established in Devon. And so I was able to grow up in this extraordinarily beautiful place, going to an amazing school that my parents could never afford. And I'd grown up in a family of professional musicians, so I was very, very blessed and fortunate to have all these mixture of ingredients. And of course, grew up in with fairly kind of utopian and general kind of enthusiastic ideas about music, life, and and I listened to everything. I mean, I was a very precociously musical child. I listened to particularly classical music when I was really young, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of it for hours, and then listened to jazz, and then more latterly to songs. Although I always loved the Everly Brothers, and of course as soon as the Beatles when I guess I was about 11 when the Beatles first came on the scene. I became a huge Beatles fan. So I kind of got songs there, but I didn't really fall in love with songwriting till rather later on. And when I left school, I went to the Royal College of Music to be a piano player, never with aspirations to be anywhere concert pianist. I wanted to be a jazz player. And then at some point, I kind of realized, well, actually, it's very difficult to have a career in music. What's really happening out there at the moment? Well, it is songs, isn't it? You know, and I was beginning to really fall in love with songwriting. And I already, I knew quite a lot of. I was fairly obsessed with a few artists, of course, the Beatles, the post-Beatles, Count King, of course, and then lots and lots of kind of. Well, like Steely Dan eventually became like a huge band for me, and songwriting began to develop more and more as an interest, more musically than lyrically. For me, lyrics at the time were rather kind of necessary inconvenience. And I hasten to add, it's pretty much the other way around now. I mean, for me, if if music's going to have words in it, then that will be worth listening to, and I'm passionate about lyrics. When I left the Royal College of Music, I wasn't sure what to do, and Kit Hayne asked me if I would help her do that's not Kit, by the way, that's somebody called Rosanna, but who was on the screen. I keep on pointing it as if it's still there, and she's not. But Kit Hayne, Marshall Hayne, Kit Hayne, had also been a Dartford. She was a folkie, I was a jazzy, she was a folkie. We didn't really do that much together. But Kit asked me if I would help her to do a demo of her songs, and that's what did it for me. Yeah, Kit's eye. See there. Interesting lingering camera work, seemingly thinking it was interesting. And working on the demo was the thing that really engendered my interest in songwriting, and I began to realize that this is something I could really learn about. And with the arrogance of youth, after we had done a demo, there she is, we decided to write songs together. And we wrote, 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 and we did demo, and we did demo, and we did demo. You could go to demo studios in those days. This is the middle 70s, about 77, 76. And at this demos, and we started to go around and see record companies. In those days, first of all, there were record companies, which of course is an interesting historical fact now. And there were publishing companies, and there was a thriving music business. Now I realise that actually we were seeing the music business at its height. It was just beginning to get into gear like it never had and probably will never again, in the most extraordinary way. And so we went around to see all these record companies, and much to our astonishment, they turned us down. One after another, they just turned us down, turned us down, turned us down, turned us down. Some of them quite rudely, not really getting what we were doing at all. And then a strange thing happened, and it was a good lesson for us. A guy at EMI had given us an appointment. In fact, his secretary had given us this appointment, and when we arrived, her boss, the person we come to see, had no idea that we were coming. He was not interested, didn't have any time, blah, 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 and we thought, oh dear, and the secretary was embarrassed by the rest of it. But he made time for us. We went to see him, and we played him our tracks, expecting the usual, don't really get the store. He said, oh, best thing I've heard for months. What? And that was the beginning of, well, first of all, it's a lesson. The music business is not one voice. But we suddenly realized, oh yeah, the music business is a whole bunch of opinions. Opinions that people, on the whole, steadfastly adhere to. And this chap called Mark Rye at EMI was a real stand for us. He thought that what we were doing was really promising, in that somewhere between a kind of jazz folk pop thing And when we came up with Dancing in the City, that track, which actually had started off like as an instrumental track originally, with a kind of sung chorus, Kit turned into a song proper. That was what clinched the deal. And when Dancing, we recorded it, and we're very excited to go into a proper studio, a studio called Utopia in Primrose Hill, which was a proper studio, but by my friend's definition, a proper studio is it's a studio with carpet on the walls, which I think is a very apt description, and it's plush, and had a nice smell, things like that, big, nice speakers. And making the record with the producer Chris Neal was an incredible experience for us about how to make a pop record. And in those days, I've actually got the record. Let's do me a favour. I've got my blue bag is just down there. Would you mind just passing it to me? No, the other one. The one. Thank you so much. Fabulous. Thanks a million. I found this at home the other day. Original picture disc of Dancing. And for me, that was magic. Just a 45, a piece of music which lasted about 3 minutes and kind of just was a little world on that piece of plastic was magic for me. I began to really fall in love with the single and the potential of the single. And Dancing in the City, we were very pleased with Dancing in the City. We thought that it had both the simplicity and I mean, it's incredibly simple, isn't it? I mean, it couldn't be any simpler as a track, but it's got lots of hooks in it, which actually, we could spend some time, if we wanted to, listening to the track and listening for all the hooks and the counter melodies and the sound effects and the 2, 3, 4, I heard some people clapping along. What most people used to say about the track was, oh, is that the song with a funny clap in it? And that seemed to be a prime hook of itself. And when Dancing in the City came out, we had no idea what to expect. I mean, we were just these hungry, ambitious, totally naive songwriters. And suddenly it started getting played all over the place. And before we knew where we were, it was at number 3 in the UK charts, number 1 in Germany, number 1 in Australia, and top 5 in most European countries, out of nothing. I remember waiting for a bus on Oxford Street, and much to my astonishment, the bus comes down the road, and there's a picture of Kit on one side and a picture of me on the other. How weird is that? And I got on the bus and went, oh, so strange. And actually, it was too much too soon. And I'm going to come back to this point at the end. We made an album, we did some touring, but we didn't know, we served no apprenticeship. We just plunged straight into it. And in those days, you kind of could knock on a record company's door and say, here I am, and if they liked your one song enough, they kind of could make you a star. I used to know one of the most humiliating experiences in my life is actually being number 3 to the Smurfs number 2. That was an interesting experience. On the other hand, I think the Sex Pistols were a bit below us, so that felt good. So it was a game, but it was non-sustainable. It was not sustainable. We did not have the mechanisms to know how to have a professional relationship with tours to sustain the kind of pressures that we got into very quickly. And within a year, the whole thing had broken up. So we did release a follow-up called Coming Home, which actually is one of my favourite songs that Kit and I wrote together. So then, but everything broke up. I mean, my relationship broke up. My own relationship at the time broke up. Kit's relationship at the time broke up, and we broke up all in 1 week. Very memorable week just before Christmas in 1978. So we realised that there was something that we didn't know that had to be explored. We didn't know what, and I had no idea what to do. I wanted to be weather report. Who knows weather report? Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were my, them and Stevie Dan, they were my 2 mornings. Yeah.
Sorry, is it okay to ask a quick question?
Sure. I'm going to do Q&A at the end too. But, go ahead.
No, just because you said in 1 week all those 3 bad things happened. Thinking, how can all those things happen in 1 week? Did something else happen as well?
No, that's a great question.
Not to sound. I'm just trying to understand, maybe draw a lesson from it.
I think it was a very salutary lesson on thinking locally and not sustainably. You know, in all those, I mean, there are all relationships which broke down. There were personal relationships and professional relationships. Hasten to add, Kit and I are now the very, very best of friends, and look back on the whole experience with enormous affection and enormous learning curve. But I think it was an example of just not tending to actually what was important. There's that very nice distinction about important and urgent, and how we tend to pay attention to what's urgent and seemingly needing immediate attention and not giving attention to what's important. That single distinction would be one of the most useful bits of information that I kind of remember every now and again. Particularly on a day when it seems that the telephone wants to start ringing and all these things need urgent attention. You say, well, actually, this is my writing day. You know, you actually put the phone away and you write. Wasn't sure what to do next, and then I had a nice little miracle. There's another lesson. I had met somebody called David Cunningham, and David had one single release on Virgin called Summertime Blues. He had a band called the Flying Lizards. I say a band, it was David and his meat fridge. David had a converted meat fridge in Brixton, and he stayed in this and he invited people to come in and contribute to his tracks. And he said, well, I play piano on this track he wanted to, the song he wanted to do, a version of Money, a very gaudy film of the Beatles. I said, of course I will. He said, you know, well, can we do it on your piano? I said, well, sure. Can we actually use your tape machine? I said, well, yeah, sure. Don't forget, I'd worked in a studio with carpet on the walls. This was a proper studio. My room with my piano and my tape machine was in nowhere proper studio. So David comes around and I know Money a bit, and I play it through a couple of times with the metronome, help keep me in time. One microphone, maybe two microphones, he puts stuff all over the strings, like John Cage prepared piano kind of thing. And then he says, well, that's fine. And I said, well, great, goodbye. And he said, well, do you want a session fee or a percentage? And I honestly God think if I take a session fee for instance, like £30, I'd be ripping off. Never give me anything. So I take a percentage. And he goes off, and I think that's the last I'll ever hear of it. Next time I hear it in the cutting room, and I practically fall over with what David's done with this. I mean, David can't, he wouldn't mind me saying this, David can't sing Happy Birthday in tune to save his life. But he thinks visually with sound in a way that I never would think. He thinks of combining elements that just as a musician just never would have occurred to me. So he came up with this steaming record called Money, which some of you may know, which was a big hit for the Flying Lizards in 1979. And so I thought, that was wonderful. We do Top the Pops, it's at number 5, and David gives me a check for £12,000. That was just so extraordinary, with which we buy half our first house. It was amazing to add. That's one of the few financial miracles that I made the right decision about, rather than wrong. I mean, plenty that I can tell you about, which I would avoid. But that was a great example of that, like the power of one record in those days. I mean, imagine getting that kind of money from one single now, just be unthinkable. So that was, and being a member of the Flying Lizards for a little bit was hugely enjoyable. Now I'm going to cut fairly quickly now, because then I decided I didn't really want to work with another singer-songwriter partner. And a long story short, by an absolute miracle, very briefly, was in California with my wife. I got married by this time, and we've been married now 34 years. And we went to California. She wanted to go and see an all-women's dance improvisation group. I wasn't overly thrilled, but we went along and I actually completely loved it. And there was a woman who had hurt her leg and couldn't dance, but she was singing instead. And I thought, oh my God, what an extraordinary voice. And this was a woman called Deborah Berg. After the performance, I went up to her and said, gosh, she sang wonderfully, we exchanged telephone numbers and that kind of stuff. I went back to England, she went back to San Francisco, so a long way apart. And eventually, I phoned her up and said, would she like to come over to England and try writing some songs? And amazingly, she said yes. And she came over to England, we wrote together for 3 weeks. On the strength of that, we managed to get a deal with Warner Brothers, and which led to, miraculously, the phone ringing, and a chap called Gary Katz, who was the producer of Steely Dan, one of my favourite bands, said, I've heard this single, we produced a single in the UK which was a massive flop, and he said he'd heard that single, really liked it, do we have anybody to produce an album, and would we like him to do it? It's a bit like, you know, God phoning up and saying, would you like a life? It was extraordinary. So that's how that happened, and then Marshall moved to the United States and actually had like a 4-year band with Eye to Eye, which was much more kind of cultish American thing than it was a British thing. But that was another enormous learning curve working with Gary. For example, because he worked with all these fabulous musicians, I thought we'll just take our songs and go into a studio and record all these fabulous musicians. And Gary said, well, no, you know, that's just going to be why? You know, why would we want to do that? What's your persona? What's the things that really make you stand out? What's your sonic persona, if you like, not just a songwriter? What's going to give us a particular sonic identity and a range of production identity? So in fact, we went with just me playing piano, Deborah singing, rhythm machine, no computers in those days, and then one musician at a time came in, and we worked meticulously for 5.5 months creating a record with Gary, which was one of the most extraordinary and one of the most challenging experiences in my life, musical life. And we actually did make a record we felt very good. It was monumentally long, monumentally expensive, and what we just made good was selling enough to kind of justify doing a second album, which was great for us, because that's what it's all about, just sustainable enough. We did a little bit of touring, very little, and again, didn't really serve an apprenticeship. You know, we kind of, it all happened rather quickly and rather miraculously and rather instantly, which appealed to me at the time. Eventually, when I broke up sometime after the second album, by this time we'd had a little girl and we were still living in Los Angeles, and I'd been offered a job working for a little record company, which I took. Eventually, actually, I only did that for a year, then moved back to England and worked for Polydor in A&R, artist and repertoire. Probably people know, do I want me to say what A&R is? You know, and yeah, artist and repertoire is the department of the repertoire. Yes, wasn't it? We're just talking about this with Yaz the other day about record companies and departments. A&R, and I have the pleasure of teaching Yaz at London Songwriters University. A&R means artist and repertoire, and artist and repertoire is the department of the record company that are meant to find artists and then look after them once they sign them. So it's helping them to sort out repertoire and work with producers and all that kind of stuff. And I worked for Polydor for in all about 2 years. And then I decided actually I didn't really want to be in the music business anymore. I wanted to teach. I wanted to do my own thing. I felt that I hadn't really found my voice as a writer. So I left, and another long story short, I ended up lecturing in music back in Devon at Dartford College of Art, which I did for about 20 years. Still live in Devon actually, and beginning to develop a teaching practice. Developing a teaching practice, suddenly I found that songwriters were coming to me wanting to talk to me about songwriting. And I began to think about songwriting in a way that I'd never thought about songwriting before. I began to think about, what is songwriting? How do you do this? It had been a very intuitive, kind of instinctive process for me before. And had not really been a very thought-through process, even when we were working very analytically with Gary Katz in the United States. And I started to mentor some songwriters, and then I really kind of fell in love with songwriting and the magic of songwriting, like I'd never done before. And I do, it's rather funny to say, I mean, I spent most of my life teaching songwriting in some shape or form, and I profoundly believe you cannot teach songwriting. I'm absolutely certain that we cannot teach songwriting. What I do know is that we can talk about songs, that we can talk about all kinds of ingredients of songwriting. We can talk about the whys, the whiches, the wherefores, the ingredients of songs, the congruent aspects of song. I heard one of my all-time favorite songwriter would have to be Franz Schubert, And I listened to this amazing talk about Schubert one day, and the guy at the end said, he was a real Schubert scholar, he said, you know, after analysing Schubert's song up the kazoo, he said, actually, I can't really tell you what this is. And I completely got it. And it's Boo's song, yesterday he played the song, it was exquisite. And then he unpacked it for us. And he unpacked it for us exquisitely well. He talked about the melody, the melodic structure, the harmonic structure, the lyric, the story, how the whole thing came together, but he didn't tell us anything about how he wrote the song. You know what I mean? It's that wonderful mystery for me that you can't put your finger on, thank God. Although the music is sort of love to think that we can. So I started working with songwriters, started writing courses. I mentored a singer-songwriter, a young man called Cosmo Jarvis, who if you haven't heard of, I would recommend you Google him, because he was working with Cosmo for 4 years, was an education in itself. I started to develop this work. I was teaching songwriting at Dartford College of Arts as well, and then eventually starting to sing, actually just over a year and a half ago really, called the London Song Company, which is now called. Classically, I forgot to bring any leaflets with me today. But if you're interested in looking at what we do, check us out at londonsongcompany.com. londonsongcompany.com. We're welcome to get in touch with me or Katie, any of us. We are very kind of ridiculously enthusiastic about songwriting. As songs, you know, it's all about the song, not really much about anything else other than the song.
So what does the company do?
We do 3 things essentially. We have 3 courses. We run a year-long, what we now call a diploma course, which are for people who want to write at a professional standard, whatever that may mean. Not that people may want to necessarily make their living from songwriting, but people who have an aspiration to work at a high level. We run what we call a development course, which is a 6-week evening course, once a week, just writing a song a week, which Jenny did, like that. And we run a summer school, and those are the 3 courses that we run at the moment. And we bring various people into the 1-year course, to like Boo yesterday, to various people from who we invited to give comment and feedback on the songs. Very collaborative. There's about 10 to 12 people on our course, so quite small.
And where does the summer school take place?
Well, the first 2 that we've done, we've both been in Devon, and we like to do the summer school out of London. We don't know where the next one's going to be, but I will let you know with pleasure. If you just get anybody who wants to just email us through londonsongcompany.com, we'll send you any information you want. But the thing which began to occur to me is that I saw that we were, you know, when I was in Marshall Hay, when I was in the Flying Lizards, when I was in Eye to Eye, boy did we have it good. I mean, it was extraordinary. Well, we had it good, we also had it greedy. You know, everybody read a book by Walter Yetnikoff called Howling at the Moon. Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that book really says it, doesn't it? About
the excess.
Yeah. The days of excess of a music business. Very much like what's just happening in the banking industry, actually. It just fell over itself. And not only that, of course, the digital revolution, so to speak, both offered extraordinary opportunities and was a huge ingredient in changing the game overnight. And I remember when the first CDs came in, I remember the meetings at Polydor. I mean, I was there at that time, and everybody's thinking, oh, fantastic, everybody's going to buy our records all over again on CD. We're going to make an incredible amount of money. What we didn't realise is everybody's going to download the same records for free. And you know, when you could imagine at that time when records were CDs were on sale for what, 10, 12 pounds a shot at the end of the 80s, well, I mean, what do you expect? Record companies, I wonder often what would have happened if record companies had halved the cost of a CD then, the price of a CD, if the same thing would have happened.
They got greedy, didn't they? Because the manufacturing cost of a CD is half what a cassette and an LP was, but they doubled the price. So they got greedy.
You'll find out the answer to that shortly if you watch the publishing industry. I think.
Got it. Got it. 100%. Yeah.
I had a meeting with the finance director of Sony Records several years ago, and she admitted, she said basically the record industry was caught napping. We had a massive gravy train with CDs because people, you had all the sort of old LPs, people bought them again on CDs. We kept the prices high because it was just money for our growth. But then technology came along and changed the game all over again. And you're right, the same thing is going to happen in the book industry. And the people, and I remember saying to her with the download debate, she said, what do we do? I said, I don't know. The people to watch are Apple. Because what they do today, you guys are going to follow. And Apple came out with iTunes, they came out with the iPod, and the same thing's now going to happen in the book industry with the iPad.
Yeah, very good points. But I want to suggest some very good news in all this. First of all, I've been blown away over and over and over again by the dedication and quality of songs that I've heard over the last several years. The dedication to songwriting. I can't remember any occasion when anybody's come in and said, I want to write a hit. People have said, I want to write a strong song. You know, and sometimes people, the commitment to exploring songwriting across a very wide kind of stylistic remit, I find completely extraordinary. Sometimes songs which are deeply personal, deeply personal. It was one such song that actually kicked off the whole thing with the London Song Company. But well, my God, if this process needs supporting, which is why we started doing it. Jenny, I was honored to hear the progressive writing of your Keats song cycles, which to me is one of the examples of what makes all this worthwhile. You know, it's a fantastic setting of Keats' poems in such an interesting way, Jenny. So hearing these songs come in and kind of having the kind of privilege of entering into, sometimes very deeply into people's kind of personal process of how they write songs and the stories they want to tell, I find completely extraordinary. And my little town, I live at the moment, I live in a town called Totnes in Devon. And 4 bands from Totnes are actually now beginning to already doing internationally well. I mean, that's extraordinary. Totnes is half the size of this room. Oh, but it's on the other hand. Ben Howard, who's now like a big star. Metronomy, a band which are big star, completely for genre, much more electronic. A chap called Ryan Keane and the chap I mentioned, Cosmo Jarvis, are all doing really well. And I noticed there's something that they have in common. Although stylistically they're really very different to many aspects, that's true. They have all served apprenticeships. How do they do this? They have, through their own courage of convictions, they have started to gig and to gig and to gig and to gig. Ben Howard's case, for example, he was in my GCSE class when he was kind of 13, 14. A very rather belligerent, slightly arrogant, you wouldn't mind saying this, young man, and he didn't necessarily show the promise that he was going to be a big international star. But watching Ben get himself in gear and start the process just because he said this is going to happen was incredibly impressive. And the same thing with Cosmo, unstoppable songwriters, like you were saying about your unstoppability as a songwriter. You said you can't stop writing songs. Great! And these are the guys that say, and they started to gig. Come on, man. I've not heard any conversation about I can't afford to do this or my circumstances are limiting me. That just was that was the case that just had to be bulldozed through. These guys just gigged and gigged and gigged and gigged and gigged. And eventually Ben got a deal with, but it's got a supportive deal with Quicksilver, the clothing manufacturer. Ben is a keen suffer, and they gave him money to go to various seaside resorts and do gigs. And so he built up a following. He used the internet. He built up a following, and then he found a young manager, completely inexperienced, but wanted to learn to be a manager. And together they built this thing. 4 or 5 years down the line, several hundred gigs all over the place, they signed to Ireland. It took months to get that deal through, but they did it. And now Ben is all over the place. I mean, driving here, I saw 2 posters for Ben now. Ben, Metronomy, Cosmo, Ryan Keane's another one. They're all doing pretty well through their own efforts, their way, and boy, have they learned a lot along the way. And for me, there's something really extraordinary in that. It's like if you're going to have a career in the music business, actually, basically you've got to demonstrate you've got something that people really want to listen to, and they're going to buy into this story, they're going to buy into what you're actually sharing. And I think there are lots of new interesting models. I'm interested in models which allow for part-time songwriters, but to be able to perform at a high level. Why not? There are all kinds of potentials and possibilities out there right here. Yeah.
You're talking a lot about, teaching, mentoring, and I just wondered, are you still writing songs yourself? And if so, how are they, are you performing them yourself, or are you selling songs as a songwriter?
About 3 years ago, I realised that I was telling people to do things that I wasn't doing myself. And I realised that, 4 years ago actually, I realised that absolutely wasn't okay. And it coincided with an experience which happened, whereas I found for the first time I knew what I wanted to do as a writer. And I started to write music which is much more from a classical base, but influenced by other musics. And that's what I do. And actually I've got a concert coming up at St James's Piccadilly in January, which I very much welcome. All profits go to the Baron Boyne Said Foundation, which are a fantastic organisation of high-level supportive music making for young musicians in Israel and the Arab countries surrounding. Really remarkable work they do.
So what sort of stuff are you writing? Are you writing pop music?
No, I don't know how to describe it. I really don't. I know it may sound like a gigantic cop-out, but I really don't know how to describe it. But in a minute, I'll ask Mario to play one track, which will demonstrate what I'm doing. Yeah. I tell you what, let me just complete my thing. Well, actually, maybe I have. But then we'll go to kind of Q&A. Mario, are you okay to go on for just another few minutes?
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, for me, there are remarkable opportunities in a whole variety of different ways. And I think this is a great time, and the most important thing is that I think that it's kind of irony for me is that I always liked instant results when I was young. I began to realise more and more that instant results don't necessarily pay off and bring great rewards. There's something about for example, literally it wasn't until I was 53 and not 57 that I actually felt that I found a writing voice that I actually could really feel kind of, I feel comfortable in that skin. It took a long time for me to feel that I was actually beginning to produce something that I felt was kind of on a journey. And the journey, it sounds very cosmic and Zen, it is a bit. But for me, the big difference has been about allowing to not know rather than to know. It's been a process for me of unpicking this kind of, yes, the enthusiasm, yes, the certainty, yes, the commitment, but a process of inquiry, a process of asking questions, rather than thinking I'm coming from a place of knowledge. I found that progressively doesn't really work. So when you come to the London Song Company, I can almost promise you that I will teach you. What I can tell you is that I will support you with enormous passion to support you in doing your thing, which for me is what it's all about. So, do you have any questions? Yeah.
I guess it's sort of an industry question really. So the contracts that musicians are signing now are more 360 contracts.
Yep.
So do you think recorded music?
Yeah.
Is that what do you think is going to happen with selling recorded music? Is it going to remain an income?
I don't think it is an income. I think that, well, it depends. It depends. If you're selling records like Ben is selling, yes, of course it will be an income. I get 9,000 a year from dancing in the city. I have for the last 20 years. It's always the rate that remains the same. So yes, of course it will be. But in general terms, the income streams have shifted from 70% from recorded income, 30% live, to the other way around. 70% live, 30% recorded. Is my understanding. And of those live acts, they are already established acts. It's not like there's a lot of money waiting for you and I to do gigs. No, it's very, very tough. As you know, the whole process has diluted enormously. The amount that we listen to, how we find tracks. If you have to have a huge amount of downloads to make any money. If you're fortunate enough to be on compilation albums that will show up, over the years, then you can make money like that. yes, I'm sure that there will be money from recorded music, but I think it is in collaboration with other things like film and television, and obviously live performance is in terms of performance income, that's where it's going to come from. I have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, radio streaming, internet streaming rather, is a means of securing an income base. But again, my understanding is that in terms of what's available for us as writers at the end of the day, pretty small. So I think the old days, you could sit at home and write an album, sell it, and never go on tour, which, you know, bands like Steely Dan actually did for many years. I'm sure those days are gone, and I can't see them coming back. You had a question.
Yeah, I had two. One was at what stage, because we were discussing this, at the moment when I perform at gigs, I'm at a stage where I don't get paid. And this gentleman said, well, why don't you try and ask to get paid? But we all sort of do, there's a group of us that do a diva night and perform, and you know, even to be able to ask for like a free drink for our services, that's like not done. And I was just wondering, what stage is it that you should be allowed to say, well, actually, you know, I keep turning up performing.
Melissa, answer that question yourself. How would you answer that question?
Well, you're bringing people, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but how would you answer that question? When do you deserve to be paid?
I don't know. I would like to say it should be from day one, but then there's enough.
Sure. I mean, are you performing to people who are engaged and interested in what you're doing? Are they listening? Are they responding?
The people at the front are, and they're always like scowling at people at the back who are chatting away, and you know.
Well, get them all to shut up for a start. Make them listen. Have them listen. Own the room. So you know, this is my space. I'm performing. And my answer to that is, if you're attracting an audience that people are tuned into what you're doing, then you should be paid from day one. Well, maybe a little bit of time when you are learning the craft and you're doing this for free. And we've all done I did pub gig for 2 years with Kit, just Kit and myself, and we got, I don't know, a hat, 10 quid each at the end of the evening. Well, that was fine. But when you're performing professionally, it's one of the things that is very difficult at the moment. It's an expectation that music should all be free. Well, you know, that's all fine and well and good in a way. I mean, you know, nobody could be, I think of myself for what it's worth, a kind of left-wing thinking person indeed. But at the end of the day, how are we going to make any money to actually do what we do unless we're actually getting something paid for our services?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
my answer to that is don't perform unless they pay you.
Okay.
If you're good and that you're attracting an audience and people are interested in what you're doing, that's evidence enough that people are, you've got a product that people are interested in. They're buying into your story.
Right, okay.
It may not be a fortune. Yeah, yes.
So I was just going to say, I think if you find a promoter that's interested in what you do, they will actually pay for a gig, or promote the gig yourself, is what I would say. Get money. Because there are promoters that say if you bring over 10 people, they'll start paying you the money. So I'll just explore.
Because we never had, I used to do the Cobden Club in London. You had to bring like 30 people, then they had to pay £5 to £10 on the door and drink. And if you managed to do that, then you'd have a regular slot as honour of performing on that. And it's really hard to keep that momentum because you're dear friends. There's a certain amount of times that they can go, and you know they've got their own lives, and obviously they can bring more, and you can network to death and all this. But you know, it's
I agree. One thing you might consider is doing an evening with. What's your band called or your group called?
Well, I don't. It's Mel Star's Music Box.
Mel Star's Music Box. Okay, an evening with Mel Star's Music Box, and you hire a venue and you promote it yourselves, and you charge a decent amount of money, and you do a really wonderful evening for people, setting it up in your own way. And evening wits, I found with our London Songwriters students, have been wonderful things to do because they give people an opportunity to create it themselves, to be responsible for the gig completely themselves, and for mounting in any way that they want to do. Try and being there's nothing like being a promoter of your own concert to actually know what it's like, you know, and how much do I believe in myself? Well, that much, or that much, you know, you find out a lot.
Well, funnily enough, that's my birthday. I'm doing exactly what you said.
Right.
I've hired my friends using our studio and asked a lot of musician friends. But I think I don't know if it'd be a bit cheeky to start charging my guess.
And the birthday.
Yeah.
Right.
But it'll still be a good learning curve because
yeah, you find the birthday party that can fall a bit wrong. I want you to wish you a happy birthday in a really good way. Your hand in your pocket. But you know, another event.
A friend of mine called Peter Banks, who was in a band called After the Fire, did that for his 50th birthday.
Did he?
Invited all the fan clubs to his birthday party and charged them to get in. It was rammed.
Sorry, just can you elaborate on the topic of apprenticeship?
Yeah, is there anything more to it apart from gigging and
I think it's a good question. I think that for me the value of I suppose an apprenticeship would include big time. It seems that in gigging, first of all, there's the writing, there's the preparing the material, and I mean, I would never suggest doing what I did, which was to write a minimal amount of songs and then go to a record company. You know, so have we got 8 songs? Yeah, that'll do. No, I would encourage the idea of writing for a couple of years at least when you first start writing, and developing a body of work for which you then select material. What I found is when people write, their voice will come through, come what may, over time. Like you may start writing like every other band to begin with, or that particular band, but after a bit, automatic. What's your name for me?
It's Benoli.
Benoli. Okay. Your Benoli voice will come through. It just will, and probably has. I mean, you're probably a very experienced writer, right? Exactly. So that's the first step: is developing a repertoire which is somehow your thing, sufficiently, even if it's meant to be in a very specific genre of popular music. It's your thing. Then there's the apprenticeship of performing. And again, that seems to produce results for people when they gig and they gig and they gig and they gig and they gig. There's the 10,000 hours thing. You kind of learn. You just do. You can't join up the dots. You know, it's like I've been in education for years, and there's hardly anything about the education system I personally really agree with. This whole idea that we're meant to learn all this information and then somehow that's going to produce a result. That just doesn't make any sense to me. It's that, you know, it's like it's the doing of which seems to produce a result, to create a sense of being which is interesting to people to actually engage with. So that would be the second apprenticeship. The third one would be to do with getting really good high quality feedback from somebody that you trust, you think can actually is worthy of giving you some feedback which you may or may not find useful. Maybe one more question I should probably shoot. Yeah.
Sorry. It was the one I asked you earlier, and you said, "Oh, can you use that?"
Okay. Yeah. Will you ask the question again?
Yes. It was basically about taking a song to a publishing company, and someone advised that it could be quite a good song, but it needs to be properly produced before it's taken, and so it's that whole that's that side of the camera.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Do anybody hear the question? Because I've got a song, somebody said to me, this song is going to be a hit song, why don't you get it properly recorded and take it to a publishing company? Well, good idea, except an unknown writer going to a publishing company is probably less likely to produce a result than any of us doing the lottery. It's a very, very difficult thing to get a result on these days. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to get a result. Secondly, basically, a lot of people will say it doesn't matter about the quality of recording. I think it does. I think that you do want to have a very high quality recording of that song. But a better way to go, in my book, is to have a pretty clear idea of who is going to sing that song. Either a fantasy artist or like somebody who's not yet known, but somebody. I mean, I think a really good idea for songwriters, if you want to be songwriters but don't really want to go out for your whole lives on the road, which is realistically what it would take, is to find somebody who will do that. Find your own voice and write for them. And I think there's a lot of potential for that, helping to build a career with somebody. Listen, for what it's worth, I would say that's a more likely option, is to find somebody and work with them. It's like what Mike Back did with Katie Mello, in fact. He you know, we had some ideas, some songs, and went around and auditioned with all these singers and found Katie Nutter, and then invested what I heard was £1 million of his own money in television advertising, because he realised he wasn't going to get a play on the radio. So we thought, well, we'll just circumvent radio. To get radio, let's go straight to television. We get into everybody's living rooms for adverts, or possibly £1 million, never mind, it's worth it. And it paid off. Completely extraordinary. Now, you could go to a publisher and say, I've got this idea for this song for a particular person. I wouldn't go with one song, I would go with 4 or 5. And it's not wishing to be off at all, but it's unlikely that they're going to bite and say, oh good, Beyonce's looking for a song just like this. You know, these people are inundated with material. They've also got the best writers and commercial writers right round them. So who would you say would be a likely artist for this song?
Probably people like Delta Goodrem and Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah, okay, great. Right, find ways of getting it to them directly if you can, through their management perhaps. If it's a killer song, it will communicate in some way. Although, what's a killer song for you? And to you and me, may not be to them or somebody else. Some of them do. Some of them do. Yeah, I see what you mean, those two. Yeah. To what extent do they collaborate? Does it, do you know? Or do other people's songs?
Yeah, I know Delta's done a lot of work with Gary Barlow and Guy Chambers. I mean, they do seem to
Yeah, so immediately you're jumping into the centre of people who've done this for an awful long time very successfully.
So
that's
how did they get there? That's the thing.
How did they get there?
They obviously did their apprenticeship.
Yeah, the trouble is they started a while ago whilst it was still an old model music business, where it was just that much easier. But that shouldn't stop you. And there's also, where are the new developments, etc. You know, and where can you find a new person that you could work with to give her a run for her money? It's a game. Yeah.
In the scenario that you've got this song, you think it's great, you're going to approach Delta Goodrem or whoever it might be.
Yeah.
What are the implications for copyright theft? And because the song's out there, and how do you protect yourself?
It's good. I had this conversation all over again the other day with a music lawyer. He said these days it's good to protect your song in a number of different ways. If you're a member of a professional body like BASCA or PRS, of course that's one way of doing it. But he said, actually protect it in a number of different ways simultaneously, like sending it to yourself in a registered package, sealed, unopened, is one way, but also send it to 2 or 3 other people as well. Particularly if you've got a friendly lawyer who will put it in there safe and keep it.
As a recording? Or
yeah, as a recording and a lyric sheet and possibly a letter which declares what it is with your signature. So it's you're declaring this is my song and it's dated from this date. You could imagine if 3 or 4 people have simultaneously got that letter as proof and the CD as proof. Well, that stands up pretty well in court. Apparently. So I think a mixture of things is the answer to that. But you're right, copyright. As it happens, I've hardly ever heard of people actually being ripped off. It has happened. I have been on 1 or 2 occasions, but it's rare. But that's no reason why not to do it.
Is it not the case though that sometimes if you collaborate, especially with someone very well established, quite often you have to immediately give up half the copyright? Immediately it's going to be collaborative, and then you're going to go 50-50.
Yeah, well, not necessarily.
Even though you might have written 90% of the song,
if you're writing a song with Guy Chambers, you want to go 50-50. If you'll go 50-50, wow, fantastic. If you're writing a song with somebody who is an unknown songwriter, or less known songwriter, what I would recommend strongly is, on the very day you complete the song, is then having a conversation about, right, who did what on this song? I have got in a situation myself where we've been looking back several months until, oh God, what did we do on that song? Who did what? And that can get tricky and can lead to resentment. So I would say, immediately you've written the song, nail it on who did what. One more question? No more questions. Yes.
Right. The lady said that you go into collaboration with somebody and he wants 50%. The question I would ask you would you rather have 50% of a million
Oh,
or 100% of nothing?
Yeah, of course.
Because people, I hear this all the time. I'm on the business side of things, and I hear this from people all the time saying, I don't want to share. Look, share a huge pie rather than 100% of nothing.
Yeah, but it's a good question. I mean, one doesn't want to automatically think that one has to kind of, you know, doff the cap too much. But I do agree. I think that in general, if you are fortunate enough to write with a known songwriter, and that's going to produce, I mean, that if you've got 10%, it could do more for your career than writing with a million different artists. Just to say, I thought I'd just finish off by playing one track before I get to hear your... Oh God, maybe we shouldn't do that. Should we do that? Should we just get on with hearing people's... Play some of it anyway. This is a piece from a song from a piece I wrote called Out of the Darkness. I discovered a poet some years ago called Gertrude Kolmer, who was a very remarkable German Jewish poet who died in Auschwitz in 1953. She's remarkably unknown, highly thought of, those of you who know her, and I completely fell in love with her work and setting several of her poems to music. That's the new one in January. I'll leave some leaflets out if you want to come along. It's a pleasure to see you. This is the first one, Out of the Darkness, and this particular song is a song called River, The River. I'm not singing to you. I don't sing.